Hello and welcome to tonight's webinar, my first webinar for PokerCoaching.com entitled A Deeper Dive into Position. This is a really exciting presentation, and I really want to thank you for coming out and joining me tonight. I'm really excited about doing this. Teaching is one of my favorite things in the world, and playing poker is probably my other favorite thing in the world. So when you put the two together, teaching people how to play better poker is pretty much the best thing in the world for me. Today we're going to be talking about positions, which is one of the fundamentals, one of the foundations for profitable poker. And yeah, let's get into the action and let's get stacking. So first, why talk about position? Well, for those of you who know me through Jonathan Little's material, you know that I was one of the co-authors for Excelling at No Limit Hold'em, and I wrote chapter 1 in that book. My chapter was entitled The 6 Ingredients for a Winning Poker Game, and that included a heavy emphasis on what I first popularized back in 2008 when I first started teaching on YouTube, the triple threat. Now, the triple threat consists of 3 components. The first one is position, which we are going to be diving deep into tonight. The second one is aggression, which we will be diving deep into April 30th. And the third component is selection, which we will be diving deep into May 28th. So if you're interested in learning everything you can about the triple threat and 3 of the key ingredients for a winning poker game, save the dates, write those down for your calendar. Now, my approach to poker is about getting every advantage you can. And the triple threat accounts for 3 of those 5 advantages. So for the information advantage, that is achieved through the use of position. The skill and betting advantage is achieved through the use of aggression, and the card and hand range advantage is achieved through the use of selection. Psychological advantage is a whole thing on the metagame, and the stamina game or physical or mental advantage, depending on what you want to call it, is its own thing too. Tonight we're going to focus on position, how we can get the information advantage, and this is going to be one of the core principles that we're going to combine with the other pillars to just make an extremely powerful poker game. Yeah, so let's get into it. PokerCoaching.com. I'm joining the team. I'm joining Team Poker Coaching. It's been a long time in the making, and I'm really excited about this. Honestly, when Jonathan reached out about excelling at No Limit Hold'em in the first place, I was kind of flattered, and I was pretty just like honored for the opportunity, and I just jumped on it. And then a couple years later, you know, I saw he was building up PokerCoaching.com. The site looked really good. My friends were telling me great things about it. And when he reached out to me about this, I was like, wow, the universe has just gifted me something I've really always wanted, which was to be part of a training team, to not really just be teaching on my own, but to be part of a bigger team. Jonathan is an absolute genius, a great poker mind, and a great business mind. And I just love working with him. He's such a pleasure to work with. Very professional. He's very available. He helps in technical difficulties like this. And it's a real honor. And anyone who's been following Grips between 2014 and now knows how much I love Alex Fitzgerald, one of my main tournament mentors who's helped me get a lot of results. And Matt Affleck is an awesome dude too. We've played in the World Series together. And I can honestly say that his chapter and Alex's in Excelling at No Limit Hold'em were the ones that I learned the most from. So as a coach at PokerCoaching.com, wow, it feels pretty cool saying that. I will be doing webinars like this one, and I will also be doing hand quizzes as well with an emphasis on cash games. I spent the first 7 years of my career playing cash games, both online and live. It is my bread and butter, and despite the fact that I've put a ton of effort into tournaments, studying them, playing them, and getting results in them, cash is still my bread and butter. So that's what I'm going to be primarily bringing to PokerCoaching.com is overarching theory that applies to all forms of poker and a lot of cash game hand reviews. So like I said before, it's really an honor to be working alongside these guys and something I'm really grateful for. So big thank you to Jonathan, if you're listening, for inviting me on board. So, position. Let's really get into the material now, because that's what you all came here for. In my opinion, position is to poker what location is to real estate. And if you're watching and you know a thing about real estate, or you've heard anything about real estate, when the question is, what are the three keys to success in real estate? They are location, location, location. So in poker, if you want to have success and you want that major key to success, think position, position, position. If you want to take a sports metaphor, for example, instead of a real estate example, playing in position is like having an extra man on the court. It's like playing 5-on-4 in basketball, or 5-on-4 in hockey, or 12-on-11 in football, or 11-on-10, depending on which country you're playing football in. Or, if you're playing international soccer, 12-on-11. Playing out of position, on the other hand, is like being on the penalty kill, or having one of your players gotten a red card, or in the case of baseball, having 2 outfielders there instead of 3. It's not a guaranteed recipe for failure, but it makes for a much harder time to win the game and to protect yourself. If strategy games are more your thing and you prefer, a war example, playing in position is like having the higher terrain in a battle. Whereas playing out of position is like fighting an uphill battle, where you may win while fighting an uphill battle, but you're going to need to have great weapons, which is, your cards, and you're going to need great strategic execution, which is your betting, to overcome your disadvantage of having, the lower terrain, or, in the case of poker, the worse position. So, when you have that better terrain, you can just see so much more. Or, in the sports example, having the extra player is like an extra set of eyes in the game, which is what position is all about. It's something that gives you access to more information. You can see more of what's going on. You have more information. And in a game of imperfect information, knowledge is power, and it's free information. A third thing about position that you definitely want to know is that position gives you extra control over the pot size. We will dive deeper into this as we get into the following slides. This is our introduction, just so you can know what kind of terrain we're going to be covering tonight. The fourth thing you need to know about position is that the power of position is amplified by stack depth. The deeper the stacks are, the more beneficial, the more powerful, the greater the advantages of having position are. The lower the stack depths, the less important position becomes. Number 5 is that positional awareness is essential to win at poker. It's one of the first things that I encourage my students to look for at the table when paying attention to opponents' opening ranges is, are they positionally aware? Do they open different hands from under the gun than they do from on the button, or do they play the same hands from all positions? And if they aren't positionally aware, it's probably a less skilled player and someone worth going after. Whereas when someone does adjust their ranges from position to position to position and plays fewer hands early position and more hands late position, that person is positionally aware, which means they are more aware of one of the key components of poker strategy, probably aware of more, and therefore a dangerous player. And the sixth thing that you need to know about position is, when done correctly, when paying attention to the right things, you can play in position more often than others, and you can have a huge advantage over the competition in every pot that you enter. I remember watching the World Poker Tour back in the day with Mike Sexton and Vince Van Patten, and I remember Mike saying that the goal in poker is to make correct decisions. And when we're in position, we're more able to make more correct decisions because we have more information. The more information we have, the more able we are to make correct decisions. So this is a picture from him at the final table of WPT Montreal, where he won his first World Poker Tour, probably largely thanks to the power of position. So how does position help us make correct decisions? Before we go through the bullet points, let me ask you a question. If you were a detective solving a mystery and you had a choice between getting one clue to help you solve the mystery or two clues, what would you pick? Let me know in the chat. Just type in number 1 or number 2. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, LOL, 2, 2, haha, 2, 2, 2, obviously 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Okay, so we're in an agreement that we would rather have 2 pieces of information than 1 piece of information when trying to solve a mystery. Now, okay, what if instead of the option of 1 or 2, you had the choice between 3 clues or 4 clues? Which would you pick? Let me know in the chat. Number 3 or number 4. 4 clues for sure. How about 4? 4, 4, 4, 4, connect 4, everybody 4, thumbs up 4, let's go 4. Okay, so clearly more clues is better than less clues when we're trying to solve a mystery. And another way to look at poker is that you're a detective trying to put the mystery together to solve the puzzle and figure out what's really going on. So this is what position gives you. This is what position gives you, is that when you are in a position, your opponents act first, thereby giving you information, and you get to act second. You get to act later, thereby getting more information. It's very simple, it's very basic, but it's so easy to forget about just how important this is. And the deeper we get into this, I'm going to show you how it grows. So the first key concept is we want to have position because we want to go last so we can have more information to be able to make better decisions in this game of imperfect information. We also get to the right to act last on every street. This is when we have absolute position because we can have other players ahead of us. Getting to act last means you get info on every opponent in the hand. So the guy who has the worst position will give information to the players who have better and best position, but you, as the player who has the best absolute position, will get information on player 1, on player 2, on every player who has to act before you, but they don't get that information on you. So we're starting to create an unfair information advantage. We're starting to create an imbalanced setup where we are the favorite, and the better our position, the better the info. This is something that my good friend and mentor, Calvin Anderson, taught me, is that the biggest flaw that most players have, especially when they try to loosen up their game and play more hands and play more aggressively and put more pressure on their opponents, is that they play too loose early position and too tight in late position. What I mean by this is when they want to loosen up, what most players do is they just start to play more hands from all positions. Now, they still do it in a scale, in a range. They don't play 50% of hands from every position, but they kind of widen up equally in all the positions. And this is a mistake. We're going to look even more into this with some charts later in the presentation to illustrate the point more. But the problem is when we equally expand our range from all positions, it ignores the laws of position. We want to open our range slightly more from early position, but open it up a crazy amount in late position because we have that huge advantage of greater information on every street as the hand progresses. And in terms of making correct decisions, it's also important to know that there are 2 types of position. There is relative and absolute position, which we're going to dive into on the next slide. So just because you don't have the button, which is where absolute position lives, doesn't mean that you can't get an information edge on your opponent. You can get an information edge on some of your opponents. You just won't have as big of an edge as the person I mentioned who acts last on every street and who has absolute position. So this is a little table chart showing the positions to just make this understandable. And we have the early position, middle position, and late position, which is really useful for pre-flop, and then post-flop doesn't really matter. More on that as we progress. So the first position, the first type of position, which is the most valuable type of position, is absolute position. This is owned by the player on the button or by the player who is the last raiser. So if the button's planning on folding, then absolute position would belong to the cutoff. If the cutoff and button are both planning on folding, then absolute position would belong to middle position. If every single player is planning on folding, then whoever opens the pot first, and that's actually pretty important, you might want to write that down. Whoever opens first, if everyone else is planning on folding, is going to have absolute position in the hand. So if you actually know that the whole table is going to fold behind you, and we'll talk more later on how you can achieve this, you can open in early position and still have absolute position. The important thing is who is left to act behind you and how are they likely to react to your open. Something also I popularized way back when is coining the term of the money chip. I would really like you to think about the dealer chip as the money chip. The reason being because when you have that in front of you is when you are going to be making the most money. You always have absolute position when you have the button, provided that you play your hand. And next we have relative position, which is achieved by closing the action. So pre-flop, if there is a raise from under the gun one and middle position calls, the big blind has dibs on relative position. They have the opportunity to close the action. Something I realized while making this presentation, though, is we can pay for the right to gain relative position by limping in. Because if under the gun limps in and someone else raises, late positions react, the big blind has to react before under the gun acts. Also, we can straddle to pick up relative position, but it's something that we have to pay for, and it's not as valuable as absolute position. So in the absence of others, having relative position is good, but having absolute position is better, and having both is best. Now, as a reminder of how to get it, to get absolute position, play the button, and to get relative position, be the player closing the action. The ways to not get relative position would be to be the first caller of an open, because anyone else who overcalls behind you is going to have relative position on you after the flop. And how to not get absolute position is by playing hands from early position, especially if the players behind you are loose. Active players like to call raises, 3-bet, do things like that. Another way of understanding relative position is it's your position relative to the pre-flop aggressor. So if you have a pre-flop aggressor who you expect to continuation bet on many boards, by having relative position, you get to see what everyone else does after that action before you make your action. So yeah, the only way to lose absolute position is when you're on the button is to fold pre-flop, which is why there are many strategies that you can implement to get position more. Few examples are limping on the button when you have aggressive 3-betters in the blind so that you can call a raise and play the rest of the hand in position with a deep pot to stack ratio. Another example is raising to a smaller amount on the button with aggressive 3-betters. So when they 3-bet, you will be getting better odds on your call, but also you'll be dealing with a smaller pot pre-flop, therefore a higher stacked pot ratio, which gives a bigger amplification to the benefit of position, which we will show on a later slide. And the last one is when facing an open, let's say middle position or the cutoff opens and you're on the button, to 3-bet rather than flatting when there are habitual squeezers in the blinds. Reason being, let's say, for example, the big blind has a 3-bet percentage of 15 and a cold 4-bet percentage of 3%. Or, we'll go loose. We'll go 5%. If you flat, you're going to get 3-bet 15% of the time. Maybe you can't continue. Whereas if you 3-bet, you're only going to get cold 4-bet 5% of the time. That means, looking at 15 versus 5%, you're able to continue. You're able to have absolute position 67% more often if you 3-bet rather than flat. With habitual squeezers in a position where you don't have a hand that can call a 3-bet. And that's why a lot of hands are best played as 3-bets rather than flat calls, especially when you have position and the opportunity to have absolute position throughout the hand. You want to protect that, and the easiest way to do that is to knock out the players behind you who may want to try to take position from you. So the key thing to take away from this slide, if you're taking notes, you want to write something down, is that you want to play the widest range of hands on the button because that is the position from where you have the highest expected profit. If you look through your database, if you look through your hands, you will almost certainly see that you make the most money when you are on the button, followed by the cutoff, followed by the other positions, and the least amount in the blinds. And it just goes to show that position is king in this game. All right. I really like the way that Dan Negreanu put this. And he's definitely someone who knows a thing or two about position. Here's him playing at, by the looks of the chips, probably the one drop by the looks of the table. Being a sports fan, by the way, guys, questions, please write them down and then like save them in a notepad so we can post them all at the end of the presentation. I've got about 15 more minutes of slides, and then I'm going to field questions from everybody. So just keep them handy, save them, and I'll be ready to respond to all of them at the end of the slideshow because I see there are a couple great ones in the chat, and I want to field those. So being a sports fan, Dan Negreanu looks at things in terms of being in control. So the way he looks at it is when you're in position, you're on offense. You're the aggressor. You're putting pressure on your opponents. You're acting on them. And when you're out of position, you're on defense. You are trying to kind of hold your ground, and you are reacting to the opponents who are probably putting pressure on you because position allows you all the things that we mentioned in the previous slides. Okay, so talking about control, let's talk about how position helps us play with more control. So a couple slides ago, we talked about early position, middle position, late position, and out of position. But honestly, that's really just for pre-flop, which is part of the game, but it's not the main part of the game. Most of the money is exchanged after the flop. Most of the money is wagered after the flop, whether you're in position or out of position. And so once we get back past pre-flop, and that was just kind of a way to plan your pre-flop strategy, you need to know that it's no early, middle, and late position. You're either in position or you're not. So yes, you can have better position than others in multi-way pots, but truly having absolute position, truly being in position is everything, because better position, while it means you get more information than the worst position, you don't get control. And what we really want when we're playing poker is control over the action, control over our opponents. And here's an example. Here are two plays which can only be applied by the player in absolute position. The players with relative position, the players with, second best position cannot apply these plays. And you're going to see that these are two really powerful plays that give us control over the action. The first one is the free card play, which is an old play that originated in Limit Hold'em because bet size increased on the turn. So in Limit Hold'em, let's say you're playing 50 cents a dollar for simplicity. The bets pre-flop are 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. The bets on the flop are 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. The bets on the turn would be 2, 4, 6, 8, and the bets on the river would be 2, 4, 6, 8. And the idea behind the free card play was if you had a draw in position and your opponent bet the flop for 1, and you expected that if you called his bet, he was going to follow through and bet the turn for 2. Well, instead of calling the flop bet and calling the turn bet to try to see if we could realize our equity by the river, what you would do to execute the free card play is you would raise the flop to 2 to represent a stronger hand than you have. Hope that your opponent would just call, fearing that you may have a stronger hand than theirs. And when they checked you on the turn, instead of continuing to bet, which is what you would do with your stronger hands, you check back and see the turn and river for a second bet. And you only put in 1 extra chip with that flop raise instead of having to put in 2 extra chips for the turn bet. And this is something that is carried over to No Limit Hold'em as well, because generally speaking, the size of a flop raise is going to be smaller than the size of a turn bet. And it also gives us a lot of control because, we have the implied threat of, are we going to bet the turn and the river? And we have a lot more flexibility and power because we have position. The second play is the free showdown play, which is, in my understanding, purely a no limit play that originated in no limit. And the idea is very similar to the free card play, but instead of executing on the flop, it's executed on the turn. And the way this play works is when your opponent bets the turn for whatever amount is, we'll just say, he bets $50 into a pot where the size isn't relevant. And you assume that he's going to bet the river for, 75 or 100 or 150. What you would do, instead of calling the turn bets to, evaluate on the river, you would raise the turn bet. If you're planning to call the river, you would raise the turn bet to say 100 or 120. And then when he checks to you on the river, you have the option to just check and show down your hand for the price of your raise on the turn, which you set the price rather than the price of their river bet. So again, by doing the free showdown play, which you can only do in position, you are taking control. You are choosing the price for which you are going to show down your hand on the turn, rather than letting them choose the price of the showdown by calling their bet and calling again. Plus, with the free showdown play, you also have the opportunity to bet the river after raising the turn. It's a very strong line to call flop, raise turn, and bet river. And that's why this is a great play to make with the nuts, but also with draws, so that you can add fold equity to your draws and not only win the pot when you make your hand, but also have a chance to win the pot by making your opponent fold. And a really great play to make with blockers, because even though your opponent might fear the turn bet that much, they may fear that a bigger bet is coming on the river and say, well, I don't want to put this money in on the turn if I can't call the river, and I assume my opponent's going to bet the river. So they may fold to the turn bet because of the threat of a river bet. And that's how you can get a lot more fold equity with little risk, and it comes in position. There is no play out of position that achieves the same thing that these two plays do. And this is just another example of just how powerful position is. Another thing about being in position, as I mentioned, is when you're in position, you have the right to last action, and thus the ability to build the pot greatly compared to your opponents who are out of position. So in cash game poker, the play is typically 100 big blinds, which means we play flops, turns, and rivers, unlike tournaments where a lot of time it's pre-flop and flop. So this is kind of what pot growth looks like. This is an image from my book, The Cash Game Guide. So because of the extra info, we get to apply it on bigger, more meaningful streets. So you don't just get to apply your positional advantage on the flop, which you can see is much more significant than pre-flop. You also get to apply it on the turn, which is much more significant than both flop and pre-flop. In fact, it's more significant than both of them put together. And you get to apply it on the river, which is even bigger. So, this is how a poker hand goes. We start the hand with little information and we make little bets. And then the pot grows where we have more information and the bets get bigger. And then as we get to the later and later streets, the pots get to their biggest. And the imposition player who gets right to last action, right to grow the pot one more time over their opponents, gets the most info and gets the opportunity to make the biggest bet. So just think about how big an advantage that is. Not only do you get more information than your opponents, but you also get the choice, the strategic option to apply that information when the stakes are at their highest. It's massive. Now, when I first saw this image, it didn't quite do it justice. So what I did was I made one in Paint. Forgive my non-elite skills. I'm just a poker teacher. I'm not a graphic designer. And I put the image together to show just how significant the later street play is relative to the earlier street play. And the deeper the stacks, the more we're playing in the red zone, the yellow zone, the red zone, and even beyond the red zone as the stacks get very deep. And again, the player with position has an advantage in all these circles. So the deeper the stacks, the more streets we play, the more betting we do, the bigger the bets, the bigger the advantage for the player in position. And this is why relative position is overrated. How many blue circles are there in the red one? How many green circles are there in the red one? Relative position is really most valuable in early streets when the pots are multi-way. And usually by the river, if the pots have grown, you're going to be heads up. And once again, you're either in position or you're not. So a little story from a session I played last month at Fallsview. I was playing a 2-5 game, deep stack buy-in. You can buy in for $1,000. And it was getting into the evening. The game was loosening up a bit. And this guy came to the table who just was really action player. He decided he was going to blind raise every hand from every position. You don't get a strategic option when you do that. It's not like a straddle. You just have to check unless it gets raised ahead of you. And I was sitting to his right, which isn't the best thing. I don't have position on this player who is ready to give action, putting a lot of pressure on everyone. But I figured out that instead of raising my hands and then giving him the option to take his money back, if I limped in, he had to check. It had to go through him. Everyone else had to act. And then I could see how everyone was acting before I really made my decision. I just limp in for 5, get all the information, then make my decision. It's kind of like straddling. And I thought it was really awesome. I'm getting all this information. I can do limp raises. I can do squeezes. But what I realized was, except for the hands where he was blind raising to $30 or $50, where I could get a lot of money in pre-flop, getting to limp call with relative position or even limp raise to small amounts with relative position wasn't that valuable, because when we were playing 200, 300 big blind deep poker, most of the action, most of the significant meaningful money was going in after the flop, and I was playing out of position on those streets. So I realized after about 45 minutes of this that actually, despite the fact I thought I had a good position, that I didn't have that great of a position. And I actually ended up quitting the game because of that, which I thought was a little ludicrous. I'm like, I have a guy blind raising every hand, and yet I don't think it's a great spot for me. And I realized it was because of my position that the spot wasn't good. And this is why the Mississippi straddle, where you can straddle on the button, is so powerful. You get to play a bigger pot with absolute position every hand, and you also get to see how the blinds react before you make your decision. It's a huge advantage. And this is why relative position, in my opinion, is overrated compared to absolute position. Now, as stacks get deeper, the power of position amplifies. So I hinted on it a bit there. We're going to dive a little bit deeper on that. So how position gets amplified as stacks get deeper. So this is a well-known fact among pro players, but not so well known by new players, that assuming no rake, money won at poker has to come from people who are losing. And all things being equal, the chips are going to flow to the left. The chips are going to flow to the players who are in position. The chips are going to flow to the players who have more information and get to act last with more information for higher stakes. So first example, we have a player who is going to lose 100 big blinds in a game. And the assumption without factoring position is that all players of equal skill at this 9-handed game are going to split up the money. So if this player, seat 1, is going to lose 100 big blinds, then everyone else at the table is going to pick up 12 and a half big blinds. Right? Wrong. That is not the case, because when we factor in position, we actually see that the player with direct position on the dead money player, the weaker player, is going to get the majority of that money in expected value, with a significant decrease moving to seat 3 and then 4 and 5. And I actually didn't even include seats 6, 7, and 8 because they're far enough away that they aren't going to see much of the profit. Most of the profit is going to be acquired by the people who have immediate position on the dead money spot, the mark, whatever you want to call that player at the table. And actually seats 6, 7, and 8, because they're kind of out of position to the player in seat one are actually probably going to be leaking some of the money to seat one, but that would get the chart very complicated. So this is kind of the baseline if you have a losing player and everyone else who's equal skill. And then as the skill gap comes into play and it's more significant, the graphs would change slightly. So these aren't exact numbers, but I feel like the visualization helps to illustrate the concept. And I'm someone who really likes to do both words and numbers as well as images so that both sides of the brain can get activated and help to retain the information. And this is why coming up when I was really playing tons of hands online, millions of hands online, we called the seat directly left of the mark the Jesus seat or the God seat, because that's the seat that was going to make the most money. And if I could sit in a game with direct position on the weaker player, I was all about it. And if I was going to have the worst seat relative to the weak player, I wouldn't even sit in the game because I wasn't going to get any of the profit. It was already going to be gone by the time I got to act on my hand. So this is why when you have a choice of seat, you want to choose the seat in position on the dead money, because that is the seat with the highest expectation. You can do everything else the same, but if you improve your position relative to the weaker players, you will win more money. There is no buts about it. And I had a funny story. At Fallsview, I was playing. I moved to another 2-5 table, and there was a spot in the game, and I learned on the first hand that this guy was less experienced, and we were chatting back and forth, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on you. I want to get you. I'm going to get closer to you." So when a seat opened up, there are actually 2 seats open on my left and right. He moved directly to my right because he wanted to be close to me and keep an eye on me, and I just laughed so hard when he was like, "I'm going to get you. I'm coming for you." Sits directly on my right, and I just looked and I said, "Good luck, brother. I wish you all the best because you're going to need it." And looking at these graphs, just to understand it more, the deeper the stacks would be, the more reloads that the player who is going to donate, 200, 300, 500 big blinds to the game, whatever it is, the more that these bars would stretch out vertically, but the ratios would stay the same. The thing that would adjust the ratios is the skill gap, which we will talk about in the presentation on aggression and betting. All right. So what about adjusting your stacks as the play gets deeper? I'm just going to touch on this briefly because we're very deep into this topic, and this is also one that has more to do with selection, which we will cover in the webinar in May. But it's always good to plant a seed. So right now we're going to plant a seed, a money seed. And what do money seeds grow? Let me know in the chat. Okay, so dead money could mean lots. We're going to talk about adjusting to dead money. So this is just ranges pre-ante. This is from, I believe that I have this in my chapter in Excelling at No Limit Hold'em and in the Cash Game Guide. And it's just one strategy you can use for ranges pre-ante. This is not set in stone. The concept is more important than the specific numbers. I didn't use solvers to generate this, so I don't know if it's exact. And it also depends on so many factors what your exact ranges should be. So it's not important to get locked in on the specifics, but just to understand the concept. And when we add dead money, which could be ante in the game, it could be deeper stacks, or it could be a bigger skill gap, which means there's more money up for grabs. I just wrote post ante as an example. It's worth adjusting for. So, range 1, we have the standard opening strategy, generalized, and then range 2 is how I originally thought I would adjust to an ante, because this is something that always, I struggled with in tournaments and I wanted to know the answer. I thought, well, if there's 67% more dead money, I should play 67% more hands, right? So I just increase my range 67% by all positions. But this is wrong. Why? We talked about it. We touched on it earlier in the presentation. And it's that in early position, the odds of running into a hand, and therefore the odds of having to play out of position, are still the same when facing 8 opponents. They're very high. And so we should be careful. Yet, the odds of getting a raise through when facing only 2 to 4 opponents are still quite high. Yes, we're going to run into a hand sometimes, but we're going to get our raise through more often than not. Whereas when we're raising from early position, we are not going to get our raise through more often than not. And so we should be more aggressive in position. So it's correct to adjust our ranges from all position, but only slightly in early position. And once we get to late position, that's when we really want to jack it up. So this is how I adjust my ranges when there is more dead money in the game. If you notice, compared between the pre-ante graph and the ranges post-adjusted for position, I am playing more hands from all positions, but the increase in early positions is quite small, 2%, 2%, 3%, 7%. And then when we get to late position, it shoots up. I would actually, going back, I would make this 18% and this 26%. So it really just shoots up near the end, just taking off in the cutoff and button. And if you notice, if you count up the numbers, the green and yellow charts are the same total percentage of hands between, your 9 spots on the table. You're playing the same number of hands with these two strategies, but the green chart is not adjusted for position and the yellow chart is heavily adjusted for position. And this is what I talked about before for correct loosening up, for correct lagging it up. This is what my mentor taught me, was that you got to respect early position. But when it comes to late position, especially when there's dead money up for grabs, you can go crazy. And the reason I did include the small blind is because it's so dependent on the big blind. And, honestly, when both blinds are super tight, you can go even wider. You can open 100% of buttons. You can open 70% of cutoffs, 50% of hijacks, and get away with it on certain tables. But you can't get away with opening 50% of hands from under the gun almost no matter what, because when there are 8 players left to act, people wake up with hands. So again, the concept is really key to understand here, that we can drastically adjust our ranges when we are late position, and we can do that even more when stacks are deeper. So 7 years ago or so, at the World Series, after the World Series of Poker, I went with Greg Merson to Jacksonville, Florida, where he got invited to play a cash game. And he was playing something big. I think it was either 50, 100, 200, or 100, 200, or 400, some huge game in a back room at Best Bet Jacksonville. And he was talking about strategy because the game was really deep. And what he told me was that, the 3-bet ranges drastically changed. So, if he was out of position facing, he's in the big blind or the small blind, he's facing a button open from a loose player. With 100 big blind stacks, he may 3-bet something like 15% of hands, which is fairly wide. It's pretty much all the Broadway hands. And a lot of the, bigger pairs. But if he was 200 big blinds deep, 250, that number might drop to something like 5%. And once they got into the 300, 400, 500 big blind range, he was 3-betting 0%. This is the world champion, millions of cash games played online, Supernova Elite, man knew his strategy. And he's saying, 300, 400 big blinds deep, I'm not even 3-betting aces out of position, because how much money can I get in pre-flop? And now I have to play so many streets, huge bets out of position for the rest of the hand. Not a good look. And likewise, to counterbalance this, in position, as stacks get deeper, we can 3-bet so much wider. So, for example, if you're, again, taking that loose strategy, button versus cutoff, and you want to 3-bet that loose opener 15% of hands, because, maybe they're opening 25, 35% of hands. You want to buy the button, protect your position and lock it down for the rest of the hand. You might 3-bet 15% of hands. But once you get to 200, 250 big blinds, you can up that to 25%. 300 to 500 big blinds, you could go as wide as 35%, maybe even more. And, the next year, 2013, I was in Macau with Tony. He was playing cash games to prepare for the one drop, which he ended up winning. And he told me one night he went to go play some cash at the Win, and he came back 30 minutes later. I'm like, Tony, what are you doing home so early? Like, you just left for your session? He's like, yeah, I had a really bad seat. I was sitting out of position to rage in, and he just 3-bet me every single time I opened. Every single time I opened. And I'm like, well, why don't you just 4-bet him, or, like open fewer hands? And he's like, Ev, when you're playing over 400 big blinds deep out of position, if someone wants to make your life hell by 3-betting you every hand or flatting you and then, making moves on your post flop, there's not much you can do about it other than change seats. And this is one of the very best players in the world, and he just left the game. He's like, don't have a good seat. Players playing very aggressive against me in position deep stack. Nothing I can do about it. And so he quit. And position is that powerful. Because what can you do? Flat out of position? According to Alex Fitzgerald, that's the biggest sucker bet in poker. What's your other option? 4-bet, define your range, and still have a massive pot to stack ratio after the flop out of position. There's just not too much you can do, which is why as stacks get deeper, position gets so much more valuable and should be a primary component of your winning poker strategy. So again, position is to poker what location is to real estate. And just like in real estate, the bigger the investment, which is your stack depth, as in property buy, the more significant it is. Position is an expected value multiplier on whatever amount you are potentially playing for. Okay, so coming to the close, how can we get position more often and profit? First thing to do is grab the best seat on the table. You want to have the tight players on your left, because then you can buy the button more often. They're going to be more predictable. And you want the loose players on your right so that you can attack their wide ranges more effectively and, buy the button by 3-betting those loose players and forcing the players behind you out of the pot. Next thing to do is follow the game flow. Notice if people are getting frustrated, emotional, ready to loosen up and play more hands. If they are and they have position on you, the natural thing to do is just tighten up. And if they aren't, continue to play your wide range of hands. Huge one, look left, get tells. This is the biggest thing. I talk about this for probably half an hour in my excelling webinar I did with Jonathan on how I got a life-changing tournament score, my biggest win ever. And it's looking left, getting information, seeing if people are showing intention tells and showing a plan to play a hand. Because if someone's planning to play a hand, you can fold half of the hands you were otherwise going to open, because most of those hands won't show a profit once you're going to be out of position. Likewise, if people are showing that they are planning on folding their hands, you can pretend they're not there and know that your odds of having absolute position for the rest of the hand are that much better. Likewise, some players will not call big raises. So in close spots where someone might want to play, but they aren't showing they have a super strong hand, you can go ahead and make a 4x or 5x raise to get folds. In deep stack cash games, this works fine. And we will dive deeper to that into the aggression lesson, because it's a huge topic and there is a fine art to that bet sizing. And finally, you want to own the metagame, because if people don't want to play with you, if you have fear equity over them, if they feel like you hold over them, they will respect your raises and fold to your opens, which is ideal because you will get position more often. Okay. And note, a little trick about relative position I mentioned earlier is that you can open limp. It's a very cheap way to get information from the rest of the table. The other option is straddling, and that way when people raise, you'll be last to act. Note, this should only really be done when there's a maniac on the table or you have a tell, because the worst thing to do is limp in with the hand you're hoping to raise and having it go 6 ways to the flop. So really, generally don't do it unless you have very strong reason to do so, but it's a strategy you can throw in there to get more relative position. It's kind of like, adjusting raise size bigger is how you can get absolute position more often, and using the smallest raise size or the limp is a way you can get relative position more often. So in summary, I hope you guys are with me, because that was a lot of information. And if it just blew by you, don't worry. There will be a replay. You can watch it again, or you can pause the video and play it back. But I'm going to summarize it here so that it will solidify in your minds. And if you've taken notes, congratulations, you get 5 points. Number 1, position is a key element of the triple threat and a winning poker formula. Number 2, position gives you the information advantage and the right to last action. Many benefits. Number 3, there are 2 types of position, relative and absolute. Number 4, please start thinking of the button as the money chip and you will win more money. Simple as that. Number 5, the action and money flows through and to the player in position. Be the player with the best position and the money is going to flow right to you. Number 6, building on number 5, if you want to loosen up your game, exaggerate your position, your adjustments to the in position spots. Don't loosen up from all positions. Loosen up a little bit from early position if you even want to, but loosen up a ton from late position. Open way more hands on the cutoff and button. 3-bet people when they're opening, when you have position, and really focus on those late seats where you are almost guaranteed absolute position and there is a very low chance of you running into a strong hand behind you. Number 7, to play in position more often, look left, get those tells, and adjust your raise sizes pre-flop. If you want to know more about this, I'm happy to talk about this. Live tells and relational dynamics and metagame is one of my favorite things in poker. I absolutely love it. 8, the free card play and the free showdown play are only available in position. And finally, number 9, stack depth is the great amplifier of the power of position. The deeper the stacks, the more valuable position is. The shallower the stacks, the less valuable it is. But it always has value, it always has merits, and it's always better to have position than to not have position. If you're going to play without position, you better have a good reason to, like a good hand, good odds, or a really good read on your opponent. And that's it. So this has been Evan for making my first webinar on position for PokerCoaching.com. And now let me talk a little bit about what PokerCoaching.com is for those of you who are watching this on YouTube perhaps, or are watching it through, you found out about it through my Instagram feed or my stories or my Twitter post or my Facebook post or my email, and you're like, I know grips, but I don't know poker coaching. What is PokerCoaching.com? PokerCoaching.com is the newest training site on the scene, founded by Jonathan Little and co-taught with Alex Fitzgerald, Matt Affleck, and myself, Evan Jarvis. What I really love about PokerCoaching.com is the fact that they have these interactive poker hand quizzes. It's the first training site I've seen that actually has an engaging format. It's not just passively you're getting information, you're getting downloads of theories and concepts, but you actually get to apply them. You get to test yourself and you get feedback immediately. Jonathan has made over 400 interactive poker hand quizzes, and myself, Alex, and Matt are adding new hand quizzes every single week as well. So that database is just going to keep growing and growing. Jonathan also has over 30 coaching challenge webinars from his Inner Circle program. And he also has live coaching challenge webinars every month. And so do the rest of us instructors. About the quizzes, they're really great because they get you in the right state of mind. They're a great warm-up. It's interactive and forces you to really bring your knowledge. There's something that happens when we get more engaged in the learning process. We retain very little when we just listen to things. We get a lot more when we write things down. So if someone wanted to see this slide, hit that print screen button so you can capture this slide and then paste it in a Paint document, and then you can save those notes for later. Writing down helps us retain more, but then thinking things through, explaining things gives us the highest level of retention. And that's the beauty of these quizzes, is you get to test yourself and then you get immediate feedback and you can kind of talk, well, this is why I did it. And then find out what Jonathan or what Alex or what Matt or what I thought and why we did it. And it's not necessarily saying that I'm the coach, so what I said is right. It's I'm the coach and this is my thought process and this is why I did what I did, and you're going to have your reasons why you did what you did, and we can learn from the other perspectives. It's not about right or wrong. It's about expanding our thought process and learning what other factors to think about. I even found when making quizzes myself, I didn't like some of the moves I made, and I gave myself less points for the play I actually did because I realized in review and thought that there were actually better options out there. So a friend of mine who uses these quizzes every time to warm up before a session says the easiest way to get in the zone. It's the best way to warm up for sessions. It's very fast. It's very quick. It costs no money. You don't have to like drive to a casino to warm up or play an online session warm up. You can just get in the zone very quickly. And PokerCoaching.com has a 7-day free trial, so you can literally get these quizzes absolutely for free. And Jonathan's usually giving out bonuses too, so there's a lot of good value to get there. On top of that, Jonathan has, as he opened PokerCoaching.com, he sadly closed the doors on FloatTheTurn.com, which was his original training site. So Jonathan and I both have something in common, is that we go hard on creating content. The difference is where I was just like, I'm just going to make all these free videos on YouTube. Jonathan's like, I'm going to make some free videos on YouTube, but I'm going to take my 700 videos and put them on a member training site where people are uber serious. And over the years, he created 786 poker training videos. It's massive. It's over 400 hours of poker videos. And when you sign up for PokerCoaching.com, which again has that 7-day free trial, you get access to all the Float the Turn videos as well. So you get those for free as well for a week. And you'll see that this is just an absolute wealth of knowledge that beyond the free trial will pay for itself very quickly. Because Jonathan is a really great poker mind and a really great teacher and a really great player too. So here's a happy member of PokerCoaching.com who won a live tournament in Maryland State and said he couldn't have done it without Jonathan Little's books and online coaching site and a few lucky flops. I too have had some wins, and Jonathan's tournament books, fantastic. His webinars, fantastic. I really love the one he did with Phil Hellmuth, reviewing Phil's World Series of Poker Europe main event win. And I love his quizzes too. So it's a real honor to be a part of the site. And if you guys want to get your 7-day free trial, that's where it's at, PokerCoaching.com. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching the webinar. I hope you learned some valuable material, which is going to help you make more profit in future sessions. If you have any questions, now is the time to post them in the Twitch chat. If you are watching this presentation on GoToWebinar and you haven't yet opened the Twitch chat, please go to twitch.tv/Gripsed, GRIPSED, and you will see a chat box which is currently popping off with questions. And that is where I will be responding to the questions because I cannot see the GoToWebinar chat box. It is not that I am ignoring you guys if you're in GoToWebinar chat. I just literally cannot see the chat box. And I really want to answer your questions. So if you have a question and you'd like me to answer it, come on over to twitch.tv/Gripsed, get in that chat box and copy past your questions. And we'll get into it. Okay. Also, if you enjoyed this webinar and you want to get into the next one, save the dates, mark it on your calendar, April 30th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's the last Tuesday of the month. And I will also be doing my third webinar on May 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's basically the last Tuesday of the month is when you can expect poker coaching webinar from Evan Gripsed Jarvis. Okay. Let's see what we got in the question. Blazerk says, fantastic. Thanks. I have learned these things somewhat by experience, but to get this explained like this is very valuable. I agree with you 100%. Having things broken down in a very easy to understand manner makes it a lot easier to retain them. And also the reason that I included all the pictures in this presentation is because some people are more visual learners rather than audio learners, and words don't really stick with them the same way that images do. So I felt that by adding images to the presentation, that whether someone's, left brain or right brain, whether they do better with, words or images, the concept is clear for both sides of the brain. And if both sides of the brain are picking it up, it's going to be able to integrate it and understand it more. I also found just in making the presentation, in writing the slides, I was getting more insights. And then when I added the images, I'm like, oh man, even more insights. So anytime we can get back to the basics and really break it down in its most basic elements, the fewest components, the least needed words, it solidifies the understanding in our minds and is a great place to continue to learn from and to build on top of. Stolas says, first, great webinar. Thank you. Question, when sitting down at a cash game with no information on anyone, what is your thought process for the first few orbits? Oh man, I love when people ask cash game questions like this because that's what I'm about, man. That's my jam. My thought process is to sit down, relax, and assess the game, to assess the terrain. I know that no poker game is the same, and I want to figure things out and figure out what kind of environment I'm in. So when I sit down at a table, if it's 100 blind max, I'll usually sit for the max. Although if I'm trying to keep under the radar, I might buy in for 60 blinds and then top up later. Because one of the things about cash is you can always add more chips to your stack, but you can't take them off your stack. Likewise, if it's a deep stack game where you can sit with like 200 big blinds, I will almost never buy in for 200 big blinds right away. I'll almost always buy in for that 100 big blind amount and then see if I have good position, see if there's a lot of dead money on the table, see if the deep stack players are to my right or if they're weaker. And if that's the case, I'll top up. But if the deep stack players are all the good players or they're all on my left, I usually won't add more. I'll just sit with 100 blinds. Another thing I find is people are a lot more willing to double you up when you have a shorter stack. So, if it's a 100 max game and you buy them with 60 blinds, it's a lot easier to get the double up than if you have 100. And same, when you're sitting 200 blinds deep, people are pretty nitty about doubling you up. Whereas if half the table's got 200 blinds and you're the guy just sitting with 100 bigs, usually they'll give you action. So I assess the terrain, I sit down, I look at the chip stacks, I look at how people are stacking their chips to try to get assessments on whether someone is a loose or a tight player. Generally, loose players stack their chips up tall, and tight players, like really nitty players, they'll have like half stacks, like stacks of 10. Or if someone has like really sloppy chip stacks, they're usually kind of a reckless player or just a very action player. If someone's really organized, they're usually more conservative. So I'll look for things like that. And then I'll try to assess what people's mental state is. I'll try to assess who's sharp, who's focused, who's there to win. I'll try to assess who's tired, who's tilted, who's drunk, who's there to gamble, there to mix it up. And then I'll try to engage in conversation to get more information. If I think someone's a reg, I'll ask, good game, you've been running well, like easy game, like whatever. Or if someone's, more on the recreational side and they're there to have fun, I'll be like, what are your plans for the evening? What are your plans for the weekend? I keep it casual. I try not to give away too much about myself. But if someone's like, hey, are you that YouTube guy? Are you that streamer? Are you that teacher? I'm honest. I'm like, yes, I'm that guy. What's your name? Nice to meet you. I don't lie to people at the table. But I don't jump in and be like, hey guys, I'm Evan Grips Jarvis from YouTube. You should check out my videos. Like, I don't do that. I just kind of sit down, get comfortable, I chill. It's kind of like, when you go to a party or when you go to a social gathering, you don't try to take the spotlight right away. You kind of see where you can fit in. You kind of see what's going on. You see where the cool kids are at and where the chill kids are at. You see where the party is and where the quiet zone is. And you kind of feel out the terrain and decide where you're going to hang out and decide where you want to invest your time and energy. And it's the same in poker. I kind of try to feel out who's there to be social, who's there to play, and how I can work with that. Maybe I can just, sometimes I go to a poker game, there isn't a lot of money on the table, but there's someone I can have a great conversation with. And I go there to, socialize and make a friend and maybe learn some things about business and stuff. So I really go to just get comfortable, take my time, play pretty solid, pretty conservative for the first few orbits. And then when I kind of feel where the spots are, when I feel where the money making opportunity is, then I'll extremely adjust my strategy to go after those spots, whether that means changing my ranges or straight up changing seats or engaging in certain types of conversation that may, irritate certain players who are ready to tilt or whatever. I'll implement those things into my game. So I have everything in my tool belt, but I just kind of don't show my cards right away. And once I know where my energy and my conversation and my bets are going to give me the highest return, that's when I start focusing on those spots heavily. Okay. A Russian freak says, can you please explain a bit more why position would be more important the deeper stacks are? Aren't the deep stacks allowing you to play more hands? Okay. The main thing that I can speak to about that is, generally speaking, big pots are for big hands. David Sklansky. And to get, big bets in, 100 big blind bets, 200, 300 big blind bets, you're going to be looking at more cooler situations. So you're going to be looking at, like flush over flush, boat over boat, straight versus set. That might not even get the money in. Things like that. And when you know that, how do I put this? Okay, so deeper stack, sometimes like I need a hand example on screen and sometimes I don't have one. So it's a little hard to wrap it off the top of my head. But because you have more information about your opponents when you're in position, you're more able to avoid the coolers. Whereas when you're out of position, it's harder for you to dodge a cooler. And because the bigger pots, the deeper stack situations involve more cooler situations, being in position is usually going to allow you to get the extra bet, whereas being out of position is not going to allow you to get the extra bet. And the deeper the stacks are, the bigger that last bet is. So that's why being in position is more important as stacks get deeper, because the last bet that you are going to get is going to be much bigger. And all things being equal, the person in position is going to get that bet more often than the player is out of position is going to get that bet. And so the extra money gained by the player in position is amplified when stacks are deeper versus when they're shallower. Also, when stacks are shallower, money will go in more easily with medium strength hands, where if roles were reversed, both players would have lost the same. But in the deep stack spots, it's really just the big coolers where the money goes in, and it's that being in position allows you to get that last bet, which is the big bet. I hope that explains it well. So the deep stacks allow you to play more hands, but they allow you to play more hands in position. It's also more so that just that like being out of position because of that threat there is so much worse. And so the player in position can play more hands because of the threat of that big bet. So you can get away with more, blocker bluffs, single card bluffs, things like that because of the implied threat of that bigger bet and the big advantage. I hope that explains it well. I may need to use a hand example, which I would prep a presentation for, but a Russian freak, please let me know if that does a decent job of explaining the concept. Okay. MJ Richards says, how much should we expand our range or 3-bet range when on the button or cutoff? Would you 3-bet with a 60% range? I'm going to cover more of that in the aggression or this selection lesson. It's kind of a blend between aggression and selection, but it's probably going to fit into this selection lesson because that's going to be about range construction and stuff. And it's hard to give exact numbers because it depends on how loose is the opener, what is their strategy when facing a 3-bet. Is it someone who calls a lot of 3-bets and then check folds flops a lot? Is it someone who folds to a lot of 3-bets? Is it someone who calls a lot of 3-bets and then check raises flops a lot? Someone who calls 3-bets and leads out? Is it someone who 4-bets a lot? So these are all the factors that we need to consider when deciding how wide we 3-bet. So pay attention to your opponent's opening range, pay attention to how they react to three bets, and pay attention to what their post-flop tendencies are. And with those three factors in mind, you'll get a better idea of how much you should widen your three bet range. A big thing to think about is just if the player makes a lot of mistakes post flop and you're very deep stacked, you may just want to three bet them super wide, like really wide, like any suited ace, like almost any suited face, like suited connector, suited gapper, all pairs, all broadways, because you want to get that person heads up with you being in position. Whereas when you call, the other players behind will get to play a pot with you. So really another thing to consider is, do I want to play multi-way or do I want to play heads up? And generally, if you're super deep stacked, like 400 or 500 big blinds deep with, a whale, you want to play in position with an inflated pot heads up as much as possible. So you want to three bet really wide. But to give you an exact percentage, I just simply cannot do that because there are too many variables to consider, MJ Richer. But I hope I gave you a clear idea of what factors to consider to, construct your three bet range. Thanks for the info. Greatly appreciated. Do you have any more handouts? I personally don't, because I just put together these slides in about 2.5, 3 hours. But I can speak with Jonathan about potential handouts that would match the information that we covered in this presentation. What is a poker squeeze you talked about? A squeeze is a raise when there has been a raise and a call ahead of you. A lot of books speak about this. I think I probably learned it in No Limit Hold'em Theory and Practice by Sklansky and I don't know if it's Miller or Malmuth, one of those two. But a squeeze is when there is a raise and a call and we re-raise. So a three bet would be there's a raise and we re-raise, but a squeeze is there's a raise and a call and we re-raise. And the thinking behind that is we can usually squeeze with a wider range than we could just straight up three bet, because the person who flats the open often has a weaker range than they would have if they three bet. So we kind of consider that dead money. That's kind of changed over the years, and it's really, again, super opponent specific to decide how wide you should squeeze. You need to be aware of your opponent's flatting range versus their three betting range and what they both look like. But that's what a squeeze is. It's when you reopen the action with a raise after there's been a raise and a call. Okay, Jay Reagan, if early raisers typically open stronger, how often do you three bet one position with marginal to strong holdings? Generally speaking, if someone's opening with a really strong range, I usually respect it and I usually fold. So yes, we want to play our position, but when a player opens from early position with a strong range, I'm often just going to be folding in that spot. But again, super situational, super specific, but generally I would say not often. I'd be flatting a lot. And if you're really, really deep, you can throw in some bluffs in there, 4-5 suited and ace-5 suited and stuff. But like, you'd probably want to be three betting those like 10% of the time you have them. So it's not like you always three bet them. It's like once in a while you mix in ace-5 suited or something. But I generally stick to very strong three bet ranges when dealing with early position openers who are playing strong ranges. What about trap limping? Yeah, I'm super down with the trap limp. I limp with aces under the gun all the time. But I like to have a dynamic in play. I like to know that there's someone who likes to raise the action, because it's not fun when it gets limped around. When it gets limped around, I just be careful with my hand. You can still get some value with a pair. And if no one else limps in and you just play against the blinds, you have a decent chance of getting a couple bets out because they're going to have a hard time folding a pair. So I'm all for trap limping. I love limping aces, and I limp in some weaker hands as well that I think aren't quite good enough to raise, but are hands that I'd like to see a flop with, like small medium pairs, suited aces, which can cooler suited connectors. Some of the weaker broadways sometimes I'll limp in, king queen off under the gun, ace jack off under the gun, get people to come along with weaker broadways, weaker aces. But I would avoid open limping suited connectors from early position, because you're setting yourself up to get coolered by suited broadways and suited aces. We'll talk a lot more about that in the selection webinar. So that's Evans. What happens when you're in a tournament situation, have an aggressive player behind you that 3-bets up frequently? At what point do you consider 4-betting, or how tight you should be calling 3-bets? That's a big one. It has a lot to do with stack sizes. But for example, when I was playing the Fallsview Classic and I was on the final 2 or 3 tables, we were really deep, and I had Mike Lea on my left, who had won the tournament like twice in the last 3 years. He ended up winning it that year as well. And I knew that he's very aggressive. I knew that he 3-bet a lot. So I just folded a ton, and then I just waited for my table to break. And I found that because I was opening very infrequently, he would let them get through because he's respecting I had a tight range. But yeah, I generally adjust by tightening up. I don't go for the I keep opening and then I'm going to 4-bet more. I go for the approach of, if this guy's going ham, I'm just going to let him do his thing. And I'm just going to wait for my hands, because I'm not losing chips by folding. I'm still raising, my 10, 15% of hands per orbit. That's fine. I just, dial it back from the 25, 35% I would otherwise be raising. If you want to go to battle with them, by all means. In terms of at what point do you consider 4-betting, you should usually just 4-bet the first time. Let them know you ain't going to take that. But I can't give a specific one on it. You kind of just got to, either you set the tone right away, or you just feel it out and try to pick up a tell for when you think you might be out of line and go for a 4-bet. In terms of how tight you should be calling 3-bets, again, it really depends on stack size, and the shallower your stack size, the less you should be opening, unless you're planning to 4-bet all in over the 3-bet. But I keep it pretty tight, ace 9, ace 10 suited plus, king queen suited, queen jack suited, maybe jack 10 suited, maybe 10-9 suited. I don't think it's really a big deal to fold those hands to 3-bets out of position. Like, facing 3-bet out of position just sucks. So I'll just fold a lot of hands that I would otherwise open. And then just, if you're going to call 3-bets, be ready to play some variance, because you're going to have to check raise those draws, check call, a lot of spots out of position. So I guess generally the shallower I are, the shallower I am, the more willing I am to call the 3-bets out of position, because, at 30, 35 big blinds, you have a good pot to stack ratio to check shove with draws, check shove with pair and weak draws. And so the positional advantage isn't as big. But 40, 50 blinds, 60 blinds plus, I just really cut down my opening range so that I don't have to face the frequent 3-bets. And I just save those 2, 2.5, 3 big blinds for later spots. And sometimes I just wait for a table change. It's just, that's part of the game, is accepting the terrain. Like that example I had with Tony, where if the guy's just going to 3-bet you every hand, well, wait for a hand that you're comfortable 4-betting and going to town with. And if you get aces, maybe think about trapping with it. Something about a replay. How do we watch that? I'm going to talk to Jonathan about that. I'm pretty sure the replay will be available, but I have to talk to him about it. The Mark says it may go up on JL's YouTube. I think I'm probably also going to send out an email about that. So, grips.com, gripsed.com. If you sign up there, you'll be on the list, and I'll send out an email with information as soon as I get the go ahead from Jonathan. Okay. Regarding keeping poor players to your right in cash games, I usually worry about seat selection from our relative position to the best players in the game, and less so for the worst. I agree with that, MJ Richer. If there are very tough players, I also like to kind of let them be the meat of the sandwich, and let the weak player be one bun and I'm the other bun, so I get to see how they all react. Because yeah, even though I have a slightly lower expectation on the weaker player by not being in direct position. I have a higher expectation on all the regs by being in position to them. So if I can pick off some of the money from them, I'm still getting it from the weaker player indirectly through them. Yeah, I like that strategy as well. Sometimes directly to the fish, the weaker player isn't the optimal seat, but in a lot of lineups, it's going to be. What's the base preflop range that was used as a basis for the position adjustment charts? It's just the range that I use when I play cash games, and it is based on the percentage likelihood of being dealt the best hand. So, if you're under the gun and 8 players are left to act and you have a top 11% hand, you likely are dealt the best hand on the table, and therefore putting money in the pot is going to show a positive expectation. Likewise, if you're on the cutoff and there's 4 players total, if you have a top 25% hand, odds are you got dealt the best hand on the table and you're going to make money by putting chips in the middle. That's where I got my chart for cash games for, but it's not set in stone, and it's probably not like the most optimal, up-to-date GTO chart. So like I said, grab the concept. It's a decent baseline, but don't get married to the numbers on there. Okay, so if the game gets deeper, we care less about opponents OOP folding their bad hands and continuing with good ones. Yeah, so if the game gets deeper, we care less about opponents folding OOP with their bad hands and continuing with good ones. Yeah, just the deeper the game gets, the more valuable position is, and yeah, because the deeper the game gets, the more important the turn and river play are, the later street play are. So it's all about the hands that can make the nuts on later streets. And therefore, like king, queen off, ace, jack off, ace, queen off, ace, king off even isn't like super valuable because you're not going to be making the most money playing the biggest pots with one pair hands. Okay. Answered that one. The Mork says, I'll be playing my first big tournament in a couple of months and have to travel to be there. What is the most important thing you recommend I do? I feel like I did a video on this. I have a video about how I won big at Fallsview. That's a good video covering that. I also have a video on live preparation. But the most important thing, if I could recommend one thing, find out where the healthy food option is at the destination that you're going to and get there a day early if you can, so you can stock up on healthy food, clean water, find out where the gym is, where you can exercise, find out places where you can chill out, be quiet, and get there early so that you can get comfortable. Walk around the casino or, the neighborhood, the area, and just get comfortable so you feel safe and secure and you don't feel like uncertain about stuff. The worst thing that can happen is not having food, not having quality food, not having a quality source of energy when you have to play a long tournament. So the more you can know about the area, the better. I'd probably do some Google research. Like I'm going to Reno for the first time for that Run It Up series. I don't know anything about Reno, so I'm going to do some Google work, figure out what's up, maybe rent a car so that I can pick up groceries. Try to get a room on a lower floor so it's closer to the elevators and therefore I can get more rest on break, things like that. And make sure you get a lot of sleep and make sure you're calm. So I would advise doing your studying earlier rather than later. Don't cram right before you go there. By the time you hop on the plane, it's time to go to the tournament. It's time to just chill out, relax, do what you do to get in the zone. You can review hands if you want, you can do quizzes if you want, but don't try to learn new information right before you play. Trust that if you knew enough to get there, you know enough to get farther, and that by staying calm, staying relaxed, focusing on your breathing, focusing on just feeling good, feeling happy, feeling your best is what's going to get you the best results. And don't put too much pressure on yourself. If the cards are in your favor, if the stars align, you play well, you just might win that thing. But if you're going in there being like, I need to win, and you told all your friends like, yo, I'm going to win this tournament and all this and that, it puts a lot of pressure on yourself in something where you have a limited amount of control because luck is a factor, and then that extra pressure leads to extra stress. It can lead to judgment when making mistakes. So then it's unforgivable if you make a mistake and you're hard on yourself. You create more tension and stress hormones and more mistakes, and like you don't want that. So just like chill out, have fun, relax, make sure you're comfortable. Trust that you know what you need to know. And if you're crossing over time zones and you have trouble sleeping, melatonin. Okay. Rocksteady, do you adjust your pre-flop bet sizing in six max cash game online based on stack size? No. I mean, generally in the games I've played, people are playing 100 bigs. I adjust based on position. The one time I'll adjust greatly is if there is a really loose player who's like playing like 80, 90% of hands, and I think that they'll call a bigger raise size. I'll make it bigger. So when I'm playing in position, I can play a bigger pot. But we'll go deep into that in the aggression webinar on April 30th. Can I read this? Yes. If you had to start over, would you play to your bankroll or to your skill level? Bankroll. I think it's too stressful to play outside of your bankroll, even if your skill is there. And stress really eats away at the human. And I don't like that feeling. So I find that when I'm playing outside my bankroll, I just feel very uncomfortable, and that's not a good place to be making decisions from. So I would play to my bankroll. That's how I built my bankroll over my career. I never went broke. I'm never going to go broke. I have safety, I have security, I have comfort, I have confidence, and that's a thing about respecting my bankroll. I think playing at the skill level, it's fine, but it kind of shows a little bit of impatience, and impatience in that can carry over to impatience in other places. So I think it can kind of be setting up for disaster. And while like it can build you up faster, it can break you down more. So the higher you fly, the harder you fall, kind of thing. And if you're someone who is comfortable with that and enjoys those kind of swings and likes the rush of that, by all means go for it. It's just personally not for me. And like, I have an extremely addictive personality. I'm someone who would go for that kind of stuff, but I know how easy I get carried away from it. So in the interest of just protecting myself and doing what's best for me, I don't. I play to my bankroll. I'm very strict with bankroll management and money management. And every time I've deviated from that, I've seen the snowball effect, the domino effect of doing so, and it doesn't lead to good things. So I'd play to my bankroll for sure. Is the position significant different from cash games to tournaments? It really just depends on stack sizes and stack sizes, ante, how much dead money, and then in tournaments also ICM comes into play, which can make position even more valuable. But in terms of like the strategies we discussed in today's presentation, they apply directly to tournaments the same way they do in cash games. The information you just received is applicable in both environments, 100%. Okay. Kep says, I play mostly tournaments, and I feel like when I do play cash, I play much like I would a tournament. Standard. However, I do bluff a lot less since I play 1-2 and people don't fold enough. Is that a bad strategy? No, that's correct. Generally in cash games, it is optimal to play a more value heavy strategy to focus on playing hands that can get paid off and really value betting a lot. The reason we bluff in cash games is generally to get action on our value hands. So we bluff a lot in small pots, we can get paid in the big pots. This is because stacks are very deep relative to the dead money in the middle, and therefore winning the ante, stealing the blinds, winning pots on the flop isn't really worth that much, whereas making the right decision, getting paid the maximum on river bets is worth a lot. Whereas in tournaments where stacks are a lot shallower, and therefore the dead money in the middle, the blinds and antes are more significant relative to the stack sizes, the maximum risk. Winning the blinds is much more important. Taking down pots on the flop is much more important. Winning pre-flop pots with 3 bets is much more important and significant. And therefore, in tournaments, we bluff because winning those pots is worth a lot. It's going to make the difference between our survival in the tournament and death in a tournament. And we so rarely play turns and rivers, especially deeper in the tournament, that we don't really need to worry so much about making the nuts and coolering people. We just need to make hands that are the best hand on the flop, and occasionally on the turn. I hope that makes sense. So generally we play, optimally speaking, tournaments with the dead money and with the shallower stacks favor a more bluff heavy strategy, and focusing on winning a lot of pots pre-flop and on the flop, whereas cash games focus on a more value heavy strategy, focusing on making better decisions on turns and rivers, and thereby the value of acquiring information is much more important in cash games than it is in tournaments. Cap, hope that answers. Was I talking about limping AA and cash or MTTs? I do it in both. I've been advised against limping AA and MTTs unless we're at a super aggressive table. I mean, it really depends. I'm a big fan of slow playing the aces. It's just, it wins a lot. Following up previous question, where can we see that pre-flop chart? It is in my ebook, the Cash Game Guide, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's also in Excelling at No Limit Hold'em. Chapter 1, Excelling at No Limit Hold'em. It's there, so you can get it in either book. Excelling at No Limit Hold'em, which is available on Amazon, and the Cash Game Guide, which is exclusively available at gripst.com. Okay, yeah, 5 Pillars video. Yeah, that's 5 Pillars video is a great thing to watch in preparation for a live tournament. It's going to help you just feel your best and play your best. Natural bodies of water will help set you the area. That's a good tip, Macros DJ, but wug bodies of water in the desert. Thank you for the great advice. Love it. Not expecting anything or putting any pressure on myself at all. Just want to enjoy it. Thanks again. You're welcome, the Morg. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you have a fantastic experience. Enjoy yourself. Shardy AYC. In a home cash game, I raise the button with a wide range for position. The other players have started 3 or 4 betting me. This is a daily game, and we play with each other a lot. Can I defend without just playing super narrow range on the button? I mean, how deep are the stacks, Sharda? If the stacks are really deep, you can call with a very wide range. If the stacks are shallower, you probably shouldn't defend as many hands. But if they're 3 or 4 betting you a lot and you want to defend more with position, you can raise smaller. That's an adjustment we talked about. You can min raise or 2.5x, 3x, and then their 3 bets will be smaller. And therefore, you'll have a deeper pot to stack ratio and you can defend. The other thing to consider is what kind of hands are they 3-betting with? Because if they're 3-betting few hands, you probably want to defend a pretty narrow range. But if they're 3-betting a lot of hands and they're widening their range, you can therefore widen your range and still have better hands than them. Your other option is to 4-bet them. And in terms of best hands, best candidates for 4-betting, we'll be talking about that in the selection webinar in May. How do you go about studying your hand ranges? I've tried to create charts, just memorize it by studying the visual charts, but it's had to make it stick. Any other method you use when starting out? Honestly, I just played a lot. I just played a lot of poker. I'd look at hand charts and books, and then I just play, and I started to get a feel for it. And then I just kind of learned like where I could adjust based on the game, and then it just became second nature, and then I started deviating from the charts. And I've actually recently looked at some charts, I'm like, oh, I want to make sure I have optimal ranges. I'm just like, man, trying to memorize charts is nuts. There's so much information. And then I remembered, right, it's good to know the baseline. It's good to have some idea of information on what the worst hand you want to open from each position is. I find that's a good trick. Don't remember all of them. Just remember the worst hand. The old notation we had was you didn't have a chart, but you had like AJ plus, which meant ace jack, ace queen, ace king. Or you had like ATS plus, which meant ace 10 suited and all better suited hands. 5-4S plus, which meant any suited connector, 5-4 suited and up. So you don't have to be like, oh, 6-7, 7-8, it's just 5-4 suited plus, deuces plus. So think, what is the worst pair I open here? What is the worst Broadway hand I open here? What is the worst ace? What is the worst suited ace? What's the worst suited Broadway? What's the worst suited connector, suited gapper, suited two gapper, or in some cases suited face card, things like that. And just do a couple positions at a time. You know, do your under the gun range, your mid position range, and your button range. Your button cutoff ranges are going to be the most important ones anyway, other than your blind defense ranges. And then just play a lot. Play a lot. And remember that it's not about getting the exact hands. It's about getting close. And then knowing that in some cases you open a little wider because, you know, there's tight players behind or there's a weak player in the blind. In other situations you open tighter, and start to get situational awareness. And then you can throw the starting hand chart away because you have an idea of what the baseline is, but you're focusing on the more important thing, which is how likely am I to have position in this hand? Who am I most likely playing against in this hand? And do I have the type of hand that will do well in either a heads up or a multi-way pot? And am I setting myself up for a heads up or multi-way pot? And I would really ditch the memorization. I was a big memorizer in school. I was really good at all that stuff. So it's like, oh, let's, you know, carry that over to poker. And it's a dynamic game. Once you have a general understanding of it, I don't think it's important to memorize the charts specifically. Maybe some of the very best players in the world would agree with me. But unless we're out there playing super high rollers and stuff, it's probably not necessary to be that exact. And there are probably better ways to use your mental energy. Also know that when you're being strict and rigid with yourself, you're draining yourself of energy. And when you're more relaxed, you have more creativity flowing through you. You have more openness. You have more intuition and more energy available, which is going to help you make better reads on later streets and ultimately help you make more money than, you know, playing one pip too weak, like, you know, ace 7 off instead of ace 8 off kind of thing. That's not going to be the end of the world. But, you know, beating yourself up about missing it or wondering too much and worrying too much about not being exact is going to get a lot of stress hormones in your body, which is going to make you feel uncomfortable, which is going to lead to probably making more significant mistakes down the road. So don't worry too much about getting it perfect. Just enjoy getting practice and know that the more you play and the more you review, the more you are going to get it, you know, get it down. Okay, what are implied odds? Implied odds are the potential payoff you can get on a hand. That's a pretty long topic. I have a whole video on that. If you search YouTube for the triple threat Vimavra, it talks about implied odds for about 10 or 15 minutes in the aggression section, I believe. So that'll allow you to go really deep on it. Because it's a very, very helpful thing for sure. And yeah, it's the potential payoff. You know, if you make your flush, how much money will you make with your flush? If you, you know, hit your set on the flop, how much money can you expect to get paid? And then there are reverse implied odds, which is if you make a hand, but it's the second best hand, how much can you expect to lose? And that video, the triple threat on YouTube, will take you deeper into that. Not as deep as we went today. This was the deeper dive than the triple threat has, but that's a good starting point. And we will go deeper on that in the selection webinar in May. Okay. Thanks, Evan. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Evan. Looking forward to the next series. You're all very welcome. Okay. It's a replay on YouTube. I'm not sure. We will communicate everything via email and Twitter. So Grips Poker on Twitter is me, and Jonathan Little on Twitter is John Little. Local cash game allows 200 big blind buy-in. If restarting, do you buy in full or start 100? Double through dead money. I start for 100 in less, and if I see that the players on my direct right are sitting deep and they're weaker players, I will usually top up to cover them. But I'll generally sit in for 100 big blinds. If I lose some chips, I'll top up to 100, I'll top up to 100, I'll top up to 100, and then just wait till I double. If the players to my right are sitting 150 and they're weaker players, I'll top up to 150. And if, they're sitting with 2, 3, 4, 500 blinds and they're clearly worse players than me, I clearly have a big edge and I have position on them, I'll just sit with 200. But I will wait until I have, certainty about that, because looks can be deceiving before I buy them for 200. Because as I said before, you can always add chips to the table, but you can't take them off. And do I defend blinds in cash games like tourneys? Or does it not matter because you can leave change seats? No, the defense strategy is different because of the addition of added dead money with antes, and also because stack sizes change the optimal defending ranges. So we can defend wider when we're shallower. And then depending on how close we are to the money, there's ICM considerations which affect it. So there are more variables in play in tournaments that affect my defending range, and also how I choose to defend, whether it's passively with calls or aggressively with 3 bets. So definitely different strategies. Okay. Thank you. Great information. You are most welcome, Hypnoboo. Memorizing the worst hands in the opening range test is hugely helpful. I should have thought to try doing that instead. Hey man, the more you thought of the best thing, which is ask the professional who's done this before what they did, and then you don't have to figure it out yourself. That's what learning is all about. Much more simple than remembering a picture. Thank you so much, and welcome to Poker Coaching. You deserve it. Looking forward to April and May. Thank you so much, the Morgue. It's an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this team. Great webinars. Kudos to you and John for making this happen. Thanks, Evan. Glad you are part of Poker Coaching. Thanks, Iceblade. Is that the real Iceblade? The one I gave a shout out to in my top 10? Maybe. Okay. Are there any other questions? We are way over time, which is kind of standard for me. I really like to give a lot. Jonathan asked me to do 2 webinars this month. I'm like, no, man, I can only do 1 because it takes so much out of me. But honestly, what I put in here probably could have been 2 webinars. So you guys kind of got a 2 for 1. You'll probably get a 2 for 1 on April 30th, and you'll probably get a 2 for 1 on May 28th as well, because that's just how I roll. So I hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you guys appreciate it. And okay, we got one more question. Can you go over the thing about the guy in the WSOP with aces? I am not sure what you're referring to, Macros. Oh, Greggy, the guy who won the main event. Oh, okay, yeah. I was just talking about how as stacks get deeper, the value of position goes up, and therefore it is correct to narrow the range of hands we 3-bet with from out of position. Because although we're building a pot out of position, we aren't going to be able to get all in, by the turn or maybe the river, and therefore the player in position has a big advantage over us. So rather than 3-betting and building up a pot that we're going to play out of position where the player in position has a bigger advantage, as the stacks get deeper, it is actually correct to flat call more of your hands from the big blind and 3-bet fewer hands. And it actually gets to the point where once you're 300, 400, 500 big blinds deep, many professionals consider it incorrect to 3-bet even a hand as strong as aces, unless, the game is playing so huge where people are opening for, 8 blinds on the button and you can 3-bet to like 40 blinds and they'll still call. But if we're talking standard sizes, 2.5 to 3.5 opens and 3-bets to, 7.5 to 10 big blinds, because there's still so much play behind and your hand is becoming pretty clearly defined, it's better to not 3-bet those hands and put yourself in position and actually just flat to defend with majority of your range, if not all of it. And you're playing a smaller pot, but your hand is disguised. And when you're that deep out of position, it's very hard to stack your opponent anyway. You're much more likely to get stacked, and therefore better to keep the size of the pot small with hands even as strong as aces, was what we were discussing there. And that's something that I learned from the 2012 main event champion and player of the year, Greg Merson, who was a mentor of mine and also a good friend, as we lived in an apartment together in Toronto in 2011 after meeting at the World Series of Poker the summer before. You might say it was a match made in heaven. That's applicable when it's deep stacked, when the blinds are huge. It's applicable when it's deep stacked, because when the blinds are huge, the stacks are actually shallow. So it's not so much about what the blinds are, it's about how deep the stacks are. Okay. Well done and well spoken, clear, concise info. Thank you, Jay Riken. Okay, last chance to get questions in, people. It's coming up on my bedtime. So if there are no more questions, I am ready to crash. What's my favorite color? Well, some people would say it's not a color, it's a shade. My favorite color is white. The most rich color of them all. It contains all of them. It's the color of the sun. Some might say it looks like it, even though if you zoom in, it looks orange. But it's the color of the moon, which is one of my favorite things in the universe. And I've just always loved the color white. I find it just such a soothing color to look at. And my second favorite color, if you're like, oh, you can't pick a shade, you gotta pick a color. Purple. I love purple and white. And then blue would be next. So if anyone studies chakras, I'm very upper chakra oriented, with white being the top, red being the second from the top, and blue being the third from the top. Cool. Appreciate your time and info. Going to join poker coaching and learn more. Awesome. I think, I don't know for sure. I have to ask Jonathan, but I'm pretty sure if you guys want Jonathan to know that you learned about poker coaching from me, the link to use is pokercoaching.com/all-in. And it might be pokercoaching.com/Gripst or pokercoaching.com/Evan. So I'll find out about that, but I'll talk to Jonathan about it. And we'll have a whole bonus thing for anyone who comes to poker coaching through me. It's all in the works, so it's pretty exciting. Okay. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much for watching this webinar. I really hope you enjoy the information and find it useful and profitable. If you guys want to let me know how your game and your results have changed as a result of applying the strategies and theories discussed in this webinar, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Gripsed Poker, GRIPSEDPOKER on Twitter. And also I am Gripsed on YouTube, GRIPSED. So feel free to send me a message on Twitter or post a comment on one of my YouTube videos or chat in our community section, as that's where I hang out. And hearing about improvements and successes from my students is one of the things that makes me the most happy in life. It makes me feel like I'm of value in this world. It makes me feel like I have purpose. It makes me feel like things are meaningful. So don't be shy. Please share your feedback, your comments with me. Even if you're normally a lurker, know that it makes a huge difference. It's what motivates me to keep on producing and keep on living healthy and keep on doing all those good things every day. Cool. Thanks for the webinar. I think Cheputij, I'm not going to say that right. Thanks for the webinar. I think poker coaching was missing your comparisons, cash games to tournaments. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. Thank you. I know Alex has experience playing both. I know Jonathan has experience playing both. I probably have more experience with cash games, and I've probably also trained with more elite cash game players, although it's close because Jonathan's like super networked and super connected. But I have had the privilege of living with and studying with and sweating and training with some of the very, very best cash game players in the world. And I played millions of hands, and I've watched so many videos on cash games, and my students have become the best cash game players in the world. Charlie Carroll, Ben Heath, Ali Msirovic. Now I'm learning from them. So yeah, it's I guess I do bring some stuff to the team in the cash game realm, and I think there's also some philosophies on life and on the game, mental game and stuff that are pretty unique to me with my background, helping people with peak performance and addiction recovery and things like that, which I'm very passionate about. It's very close to me, so yeah, I'm excited to bring a new flavor to the mix and bring more value to the team. It's awesome. Stola says, my son Easton wants to say hi to you. Hi, Easton. Thanks. Thanks for the greets. I appreciate it. El Deuterino, or Ekel Deuterino, you're welcome for the webinar. And Herbs asks, is the training in Grips still going to run in parallel of any content going to poker coaching? Yep. Grips.com is going to continue to run, and I will be offering different things on grips.com that I'm offering on poker coaching. Poker coaching, I'm going to be focusing on the quizzes and some webinars, and Grips is really going to focus a lot on the free offerings, the free training programs, kind of the free Project Get Me Stacking programs. There's lots of cool stuff in the works, which I'll be releasing over the next few weeks. Are going to be big, and the next couple months are going to be really big too. Yeah, and I'll have some products as well. Not a lot, but some products that are exclusively available on Grips. So I'll still be doing my own thing on the side at Grips, but I'm going to be putting a ton of my energy into PokerCoaching.com because I think it's a really good opportunity. I think it's a really good team that I've been invited to be a part of. And I think that, individuals win games, but teams win championships. And I would really love to be on the championship winning team in the poker coaching, poker education arena. So it makes sense that I'm going to focus on putting a lot of really high quality stuff into poker coaching. Chris, poker coaching, package subscription, maybe, or promotion, maybe. I'll talk to Jonathan about it. He's a very creative guy. He knows how to structure deals and arrangements and promotions and packages and giveaways and stuff. So I'm sure that he and I will come to something that is mutually beneficial for both of us, and most importantly, maximally beneficial for the students, because regardless of where you guys are learning, as long as you're getting better, and as long as when people ask, you just say the name. I learned from Jonathan Little, I learned from Evan Jarvis. Doesn't matter whether it's at grips.com or floattheturn.com or pokercoaching.com. The main thing is that you guys are getting better, and if people ask, that you're happy to share who you learned it from, and our personal names are more important than our brand names. And we appreciate any referrals, recommendations, and shout outs. But please only speak the truth. You don't need to oversell us or butter us up or anything. Just, we appreciate when you honestly share with people how you feel about us and our teachings. And you guys are what make it work. And girls. Okay, so that looks like it's wrapping it for the questions and wrapping it for my energy levels as well. Do I hit the big stacks at parks? Nope. I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So I play at Niagara Falls, Brantford Charity Casino, Rama Casino, and then I play tournaments in Vegas. I'm going to play my first one in Reno, sometimes Montreal, and the Caribbean. I really like to play poker in the Caribbean too. It's kind of my dream, actually, to live at the Hard Rock Hotel in Punta Cana and play in their cash game room on the daily and play tournaments on the island and just live in the Dominican Republic. So it's not there yet, but it's in the works. And, if dreams do come true and this law of attraction, this power of manifestation is real, don't be surprised if you see me posting pictures on Instagram at Gripst from the Hard Rock Hotel in Punta Cana, living the dream. It's I believe it can happen. So it's just a matter of focusing the energy, doing good quality work, and being patient with the process. Rocksteady says, thank you for your time tonight. You are welcome, brother. Thank you for your time as well. Thank you, everyone who invested your time tonight to spend it with me. I know you could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. And I really look forward to hearing your results from applying the information, hearing how many tough spots you avoided and how many really profitable spots you put yourself in by making these adjustments. And I look forward to seeing you April 30th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for the next webinar, where we will be taking a deep dive into the second component of the triple threat aggression. This has been Evan Jarvis, also known as Gripst, for PokerCoaching.com. Thank you for watching, and you know what to do. Take what you've learned, go out there, and get stacked.